Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1
Aye.
Anyone against? That is carried. There's no deputations, no petitions, no community reports. Public questions on notice, there's none of those, but public questions without notice. We have some of those. I think, is it Leanne going to read those out?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The first set of questions are from Ron Baines of Kings Meadows. Question 1. Who has received the grants from the City of Launceston? The Mayor said this would be made public 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I can confirm that I did say it would be made public, but that would be once we have a complete list of organisations that receive the Community Recovery Package Innovation Grants, and then it will definitely be released. At this stage, the Level 1 grants round is yet to be completed, so therefore, and it would probably now release it after the audit as well.
Thank you, Mayor. The next, Mr Baines' second question is, what has been the point of reference that enabled these recipients to be given a grant?
Thank you. The eligibility for organisations to apply for an innovation grant were as follows. Small and medium businesses, a business, sole trader, partnership, company or trust that employs fewer than 20 people and has an aggregate turnover of less than 10 million. Businesses operating within the City of Launceston municipality with at least one Launceston-based employee. Indigenous corporations, incorporated associations, registered unincorporated associations, not-for-profits, registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, and all located within the Launceston municipality. Eligible organisations and businesses must have a valid Australian business number, ABN. Business organisations operating on or before the 31st of January 2020. Businesses, organisations with the ability to demonstrate how their business organisation is affected by the COVID-19. How your business organisation will benefit from implementing digital solutions. And applications must meet the above eligibility plus all category eligibility specific to the grant they are applying for. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr Baines' third question. When I pass the CH Smith Council car park, it always appears to be mostly empty. Is this facility running at a profit or a loss?
Thank you. Within the CH Smith complex, the City of Launceston owns a section of the car park for staff parking and a public car parking section comprising 67 spaces. The remaining balance of the car parking spaces are in private ownership. Council staff pay the requisite parking fees to utilise parking spaces in the designated area, and all available spaces are subscribed. Members of the public are able to pay to utilise parking within the public car park. The usage of the public car park, that is the 67 spaces, has been low, around 20%. However, this has started to increase in the recent times. The council-owned car parking services within the complex is currently running at a deficit. However, this will be addressed in the future as more people start to utilise the public parking that is available. The council will be exploring means to promote more public usage of the car parking, including improved signage and advertising. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next question is from Mr Jim Dickinson of Riverside. Regarding the Fragrance Hotel development application, and with hindsight, it could reasonably be argued that the appeal regarding the Gorge Hotel should have been with REMPAT and not the Planning Commission. The project might well be under construction by now. Regarding the Fragrance Hotel application to be considered at today's meeting, I imagine it will get council approval and indeed hope so. If approval is given and is subsequently appealed, will this appeal be taken to REMPAT?
Thank you for the question. The proponents of the Gorge Hotel choose to submit a discretionary development application under the provisions of the current planning scheme, the Launceston Interim Planning Scheme 2015, and the development application 0127 in 2019. The Planning Authority is required to assess and determine a valid application submitted in accordance with the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, that's LUPA. Council sitting as a planning authority approved the application before it, and that decision was then appealed to the Resource and Management Planning Appeals Tribunal, REMPAT. under section 61.5 of LUPA. Item 9.1 on today's council agenda is to consider a development application pursuant to LUPA for DA 0506 2019, proposed visitor accommodation and other uses. The council, sitting as a planning authority, has discretion to approve with conditions or refuse the application. Whatever the determination by the planning authority, there are appeal rights available to the applicant and representatives through the provisions of LUPA. If an appeal were to be lodged by any party, it would be through RAMPAT. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next two questions are from Vivian Gale. Question 1. Why hasn't financial reporting been included in the QVMag quarterly activity report? And question 2. When will a financial reporting component be included in the QVMag quarterly activity reports?
Thank you. The intention of the activity reports is to provide councillors with a regular overview of QVMag activities. QVMag financial performance is incorporated into the City of Launceston financial reporting. The QVMag annual report is a legislative requirement and as such contains more detailed information on QVMag activities and financial performance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next three questions are from Mr. Lionel Morell, President of the Tasmanian Ratepayers Association. Question 1. A 60-day priority notice lodged by Simmons Wolfhagen on 12 March 2020 on behalf of Launceston City Council for the transfer of titles from Scimitar Custodians Proprietary Limited in relation to property at 118 to 122 Brisbane Street, Launceston, the former Birchall's premises and adjacent retail shop, is no longer published by the Land Titles Office. Can Council confirm that it is no longer proceeding to purchase these properties or otherwise explain why the priority notice has been withdrawn? Question 2. In partnership with the Tasmanian Government, is Council proceeding to purchase the Patterson Street Central Car Park at 41 to 45 Patterson Street, Launceston? Question 3. What is the purpose of purchasing the properties referred to in questions 1 and 2 above, and how does this provide for occupation by Creative Holdings Proprietary Limited and or the education organisations Foundry and Swinburne University?
Thank you for the questions. These questions will be taken on notice. Responses will be provided in the agenda of the next council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next questions are from Ray Norman of Trevelyan. Question 1. In the light of Tasmania's projected budget deficit of $2 billion and the increasing information in the press and via other networks to do the impending financial crisis facing the Australian community, in Tasmania specifically, and in the threat of elevated unemployment levels across the board and in the public sector, will Council, in order to achieve ethical, equitable and sustainable operational budgets that fit current economic circumstances, consider A, proactively following the example of the university sector and initiate budget constraints aimed at preserving employment opportunities, and B, proactively initiating a salary and benefit savings program in the range of 5% to 15% for middle management dependent upon salary levels, and C, proactively initiating a salary and benefit savings cut at executive levels dependent upon the level of higher discretionary salary and benefits currently being received, and D, proactively initiating local cum regional procurement and tendering program focused on both creating and sustaining employment in the municipality and region, and E, proactively initiating local cum regional procurement program with other councils in the region, and F, consistent with all this initiate, put in place protocols that ensure that savings are not made preferentially at the lower end of pay scales to advantage or maintain higher salaried positions.
Yeah, thank you. And the answer is the Council is in the process of reviewing and refining its long-term finance plan to respond to the financial impact which has been created by the COVID-19 pandemic. There will be many measures that the Council will consider for inclusion in this plan to address these financial impacts. The draft long-term financial plan will be considered at a future council meeting once this work has been finalised. And thank you, Leanne. Can I also note that I think Councillor Cox has now joined the meeting?
Thank you, Mayor. Question 2 from Mr. Norman. In the light of the advice offered as a result of questions relevant to QVMag reporting, when will the reported quarterly activity reports actually be delivered on time? B, when will these quarterly activity reports include a meaningful and appropriately detailed financial component? And consistent with that, C, when will there be meaningful and detailed reporting on all aspects of the operation's income generation? And consistent with that, D, undertake a class of reporting that identifies key performance indicators consistent with appropriate strategic planning, funding sources, and the overall fiscal dimension of the QVMag operation.
Thank you. These reports were instituted in February of this year. The next one is due in May. They capture activities on a quarterly basis and are not required on specific dates. City of Launceston Planning and Reporting incorporates QVMag activity. The QVMag annual report is a legislative requirement and contains more specific detail about the museum's activities and financial performance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Question 3 from Mr. Norman. Consistent with community initiatives elsewhere in Australia, and in the light of Council's policy determination relative to climate emergency and the consequences of the economic fallout due to the COVID-19 crisis, will Council A, encourage and or facilitate community-initiated verge gardening, and consistent with that, B, encourage residential precincts to proactively develop food forests that are also community-managed environmental assets, and consistent with that, C, identify underutilised land in urban precincts that may be available for community-initiated projects, and consistent with that, D, initiate and market community-oriented information networking towards achieving specific goals in urban precincts focused on precinct amenity.
Yeah, I thank Mr. Norman for the question and the suggestions, and can advise that they will be considered as part of the implementation of the Council's sustainability strategy. Thank you. Any further questions, Leanne?
No, thank you, Mayor. That's the end of the public questions.
Thank you very much. We then move on to the Planning Authority. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items included in agenda item 9, Planning Authority. So we have 9.1, and I believe we have a number of speakers for 9.1 or statements to be read. Who's starting off on that?
Oh, sorry. So the first one is from Mike Seward of Victoria, and his statement is, in addition to my formal submission regarding the above, I wrote a letter published in the Examiner on the 21st of April, broadly addressing the matter at hand. Below, I expand thereon. The amenity of a town or city is not measured by how many big flash buildings it has, but by a rubric of many factors, most of which do not shout their presence, but are just there. Accessible, friendly and inviting, quietly contributing to an active, communal and vibrant community life. Any commercial sector, should it be it tourism, manufacturing, transport or other, which ends up imposing itself as some sort of dominant icon, may well be contributing to the economy in a narrow sense, but simultaneously undermining its purpose, the above mentioned amenity. Launceston has a number of iconic significant developments over recent decades, from the casino to the seaport to the more recent C.H. Smith precinct. Many of those projects have had a strong theme of repurposing existing infrastructure and also create synergies and opportunities for adjacent areas, for example, North Bank. More recently, there has been a burst of repurposing many older buildings to residential use, which is fundamentally revitalising CBD, further increasing both its amenity and economic activity. Launceston's geography generally does not need visual sexing up. The gorge, the river and the valley are quite sufficient to my mind. The city's broad appeal is independently and objectively evidenced by the recent increase in real estate prices, a standout nationally. The city is more than just doing something right, it seems. I recently moved to southwest Victoria from Launceston for family reasons, but still feel for the city after 40 years residency, the length of my professional career, which the city gave me and still have links. The move has historical precedence, it seems, as I live in Port Fairy, a colony of Launceston since the 1830s.
Thank you. And
The
Sue
sec-
Lafferty. Yep.
Yep.
Sorry.
The second statement is Sue Lafferty, who provides her address as Victoria. It's important that elected representatives represent their citizens' interests and listen to their valid concerns regarding the Fragrance Hotel proposal, which threatens to diminish Launceston's invaluable, irreplaceable historic heritage if approved. Many comments have been made in submissions against this proposal, which point to the inappropriateness of the proposal's height, the traffic congestion issues with the resultant pollution possibly replicating the temperature inversion effects of wood heating in the Launceston environment, the overshadowing effects of the proposal's height, the massive bulk and unattractiveness of the proposed build, the lack of cohesion with regard to the streetscape heritage aspects, and so on. In particular, Veronica Henderson's submission of 15th of April 2020 eloquently comments on the destruction of heritage in Melbourne over the years and the desire to escape the resultant wreckers' damage in their quest to build a higher, more congested city by moving to Launceston. Similar sentiments were expressed in other submissions against this proposal. Launceston has a magnificent and valuable asset in its heritage buildings. Such heritage buildings give a city ambience which is incomparably more visually attractive than the present high-rise monolithic building construction so rampant in cities all over the world today. Visitors to Tasmania come to view the history of the state recorded in its heritage buildings, which speak to us of a historic past that needs to be preserved for future generations and to view its beautiful scenery. It is like a breath of fresh air to come to such a beautiful state, but it's very important that it's not threatened by insensitive, inappropriate developments such as this application. Heritage needs to be preserved if derelict. This site is worthy of a more worthy, harmonious revitalisation. Please oppose this application if you value Launceston's significance.
Thank you.
This next submission is from Julianne Richards of Legana. If Launceston wants to forge a future for itself as a vibrant, livable city that inspires its residents, its state and its visitors, it must work to extract its strengths and natural advantages. If it decides to become just like anywhere else, it will be. Thoughtful and sensitive development will play a role in a positive future for us. Inappropriately sited high-rise development will just perpetuate mistakes made in many other cities. Which CBD do you prefer, Launceston or Hobart? A city's character and heritage belongs to all its people. A city's sunshine, skyscrape and views belong to all of its people. We can give these rights to a company for its own exploitation, but what will that give the citizens? Jobs can be generated just as successfully, arguably more so, by developments of an appropriate scale. Many of the jobs I have had allowed me to meet visitors to Tasmania. None of them have ever said, I wish Launceston had more high-rise buildings, but a lot have offered their impressions of delight and enthusiasm about the beauty, human scale and range of intact heritage our city is privileged to have. People crave the authentic and distinctive. I urge Council to respect the planning scheme, the assets of the city and all the people of Launceston. I respectfully ask you as custodians of the city to reject this proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next submission is from Helen Tate of Launceston. I have made submission against the bulk and height of this development, which is outside the character of the immediate location and of our city generally. The proposed hotel development would profoundly affect the unique visible heritage, scale and ambience of a Launceston so widely valued for those very qualities. Further, I am at a loss to understand why so many councillors seem to have such poor appreciation of the provisions and intent of the LCC planning scheme. I am appalled and deeply disappointed that the council staff and councillors blatantly left it to ratepayers to challenge the LCC's failure of due oversight as exposed in the planning appeal decision for the Gorge Hotel. Let's hope in the name of common decency that error is not repeated for this DA, also potentially carrying brutal impact on the skyline and fabric of our fair city.
Thank you.
The next submission is by Inga Kaiser of West Launceston. According to the growth scenario assessments by BDA Marketing Planning in 2017, we would have been in need of a vast number of hotel rooms for high-spending visitors being expected to come to Launceston by 2020. How wrong can a prognosis be, and may this teach us a lesson? 2020 started with bushfires that devastated large areas of our bushland. We already had lost even larger areas in previous years to fires, including parts of our temperate rainforest. Climate change effects and also future logging plans will see to more loss of wilderness and wildlife species. The COVID-19 pandemic made sure that not only the predicted high-spending visitors did not come to Tasmania, but in fact no visitors at all for several months and still counting. Word goes round the world that our most precious commodities, which are our pristine, untouched nature and unique wildlife, are seriously threatened and doesn't receive the protection it desperately needs. How attractive will this be for future visitors? The COVID-19 pandemic measures cause a worldwide recession together with inevitable increase in airfares, etc. This will logically lead to the likely downturn of future tourism. Do we still cling to the illusion of needing more large hotels? How are the chances for them to be half empty for the great part of the year? Wouldn't it be more economically promising to focus instead on the inner city dwellings that might transform the considerable number of empty spaces, vacant shops and flats above shops within the city centre to attract families and innovative businesses? This infrastructure that already exists in most cities worldwide can perhaps invigorate Launceston's image and become a more vibrant and future fit city. The proposed Fragrance Hotel in Launceston's historic city landscape is not only oversized, but also obsolete in my view and should not be approved.
Thank you. And next.
The next statement comes from Gloria Keshow of South Launceston. I am, as are many others, very concerned in allowing this proposal to be passed by Council, as the height of this proposal is extremely concerning. This height is way above the limit. I understand it to be 40.3 metres. This modern building does not add value of the City Clarion Hotel and the Harrops building, and totally not in keeping, as this devalues this area. This proposal should not be passed also for the area of Cimetiere and Tamer Streets, where this will become highly congested by traffic, to say the least. Buildings, hotels in the area will take away the character of the surrounding buildings, like the Albert Hall and City Park. This height is totally not right for area. Allow these kinds of heights to be passed by Council, and LCC height restriction is no longer. This would allow high-rise buildings to be given a green light. This is not to say no hotels, but this development is so inappropriate.
Thank you.
Okay, next is from Neil Gross from Launceston Chamber of Commerce. The Launceston Chamber of Commerce strongly supports this development application. This significant development complies with the planning scheme, and to that extent, councillors should be comfortable in exercising their discretion in supporting it. The process of ensuring that this new development fits comfortably within the planning scheme and the city itself has been extensive and thorough. The contemporary design of this hotel integrates Art Deco and Victorian free classical styles into the development to achieve a viable business proposition and a structure which adds to the architectural fabric of the city. The architectural excellence displayed through the design reimagines a long neglected part of the city through adaptive reuse, and it will transform it to a centre of economic and social activity. From a business perspective, this development fills a critical gap in Launceston's accommodation offering, as the city currently has no 200+ room hotels. By way of example, Hobart has 6. For Launceston to fully capitalise on the growing business events market and conferencing, it needs hotels of this scale and quality. Construction means an estimated spending approaching $60 million at a critical time for Launceston as the city seeks to emerge from the COVID-19 crisis. This mixed-use development brings with it the potential of tremendous economic benefits, not only through the construction stage, but all the economic flow on of the 200 hotel staff. Furthermore, the TICT estimates that every dollar of direct expenditure by visitors in the local economy is subject to a tourism industry income multiplier of 1.9. The introduction of a premium branded hotel to Launceston will ensure that the 60% of high-end loyalty visitors will plan for Launceston to be within their travel plans. Launceston's built and natural attractions are stronger than competitors and will significantly leverage on the successful construction of a development such as this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a statement from Veronica Down Redburn of Launceston. I cannot believe that you would be pushing this proposal during the coronavirus lockdown, excluding people from meeting and discussing what is in the best interests of Launceston's future. If you allow the Fragrance Hotel to reach 43 metres, it will set a precedent for other greedy foreign investors to destroy our heritage city with contemporary monstrosities. It will also encourage JCA to resubmit his plans for the Gorge Hotel, which was a dominating, inappropriate and unsound insult. It would not have been the only building to sink into the swampland in recent times. Many of us have lived in or around Launceston for most of our lives, yet during the Gorge Hotel survey, I was offended by being told I was too old and outside the boundary to have an opinion. Yet, because of our failing education system, the younger target group have little knowledge about the importance of our history and heritage. I remind you again, during the 1960s to 70s, many beautiful heritage buildings were demolished to make way for higher, ugly, contemporary buildings. The straw that broke the camel's back was the sudden disappearance of the Mechanics Institute Library. I distinctly remember the public outcry from Launceston citizens who demanded the preservation of our history and heritage, as well as restrictions placed on new building heights. Greedy overseas investors and local prima donnas are only looking after themselves, and I would ask them who they are building these unaffordable monstrosities for. Why is the City Council cutting off its nose to spite its face when real tourists come here to see our low-rise heritage buildings, the natural gorge and our history?
Thank you.
The next submission is from Jiri Lev of Launceston. During the course of the past decades, most of Australian and international cities have lost their charms to vast clusters of oversized, generic, characterless buildings. If one was to be transported randomly into one of these globalized cities, one would not be able to readily tell whether one was in Brazil, China, Qatar, or indeed Australia. Having worked in architecture for over 2 decades, when I first visited Launceston in 2015, I was instantly impressed by its array of heritage buildings, here and there interrupted by a tasteful concrete modernist insertion, all wrapped in a pleasant natural scenery. Like Prague, where I come from, Launceston is a truly unique city, nationally and globally. The current proposal of the Fragrance Hotel is to be commended for preserving the heritage street facades of the existing building. Quite obviously, the proposal's consideration for its surroundings ends right there. What happens behind and high above can only be described as a mounting stack of random blocks. The proposal aims at 12 stories without even utilising the space available below. Directly facing the city park, a massive 5-storey block sits on top of 2 concrete columns towering 20 metres above the existing heritage buildings. From an architectural perspective, this proposal can only be seen as poorly considered and giving minimum regard to its surrounding from any perspective other than its own. At minimum, the building's overall height can and must be reduced. The exterior facades must be redesigned to complement the character of the city. The nearby Verge Hotel does this reasonably well. A similar or better outcome must be required of the Fragrance Hotel. In its current form, the proposal represents an open door to the destruction of the very thing it aims to benefit from, the unique character of Launceston.
Thank you. And next.
The next statement is from Irene Duckett, Irenic Planning and Urban Design of Launceston. The proposal has responded to height and bulk matters in the architectural statement where significant analysis of the capacity and siting for areas of greater height were deduced. This includes an analysis of the application of the Paul Davies Heritage Study onto the existing built form and heritage of the site. The proposal further addressed this through setbacks to ensure that the ground floor presents to the street as 2-3 stories with active frontages and height is stepped within the site. The first 2 to 3 stories are imperative to informing a person's experience of the streetscapes at pedestrian scale. Qualities such as active frontages, variation in materiality and opportunities for visual and physical permeability create lively and engaging streets. The proposal achieves this through the retention of heritage facades and improving permeability to the site. The current Harrops and Sons warehouse presents to the street as a solid brick facade. The redevelopment will improve the street level experience by creating active ground floors and greater opportunities for passive surveillance. Furthermore, the proposal promotes permeability and engagement through site links. As shown in the shadow diagram supplied, there will be some overshadowing, largely during the winter. However, the impact has been mitigated through the strategic siting of taller elements of the proposal away from public spaces. The proposal promotes the reuse of heritage buildings and heritage fabric. It has been through many design iterations in response to consultation with the City of Launceston Planning and Heritage Departments. As a result, the design has been refined in response to heritage considerations. The Heritage Impact Assessment states, an appropriate adaptive reuse of these buildings as part of the proposed development is consistent with that shift in the cityscape and land use patterns and provides an essential feasible future for these buildings which are otherwise sitting underutilised and partially derelict.
Thank you. So next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next submission is from Joanne Saunders of Trevellyn. The proposal fails to comply with 15.4.1 of the Launceston Interim Planning Scheme. Too high and too bulky. It is not compatible with the streetscape or character. It dominates and it will be viewed from many roads near and far. This development does not meet the local historical cultural heritage code. Under 13.6.5, the height and bulk of the new development is incompatible with the historic cultural significance of this place and its setting. Launceston is recognised for low-rise, intact heritage buildings, and many who have loved this place as visitors come and live here. It is ironic that building tall, bulky hotels to house the visitors may well put them off coming in the long run. People come here because they like Launceston the way it is. They leave behind large, high-rise cities to get a taste of another way of life, a life that is quieter and more human in scale. That is the Launceston I want to keep and the Launceston that visitors come to enjoy. Accommodation that is sensitive to Launceston's character would be welcomed. Surely, in the case of Launceston, bigger is not better. On my walk recently, I noticed that I could no longer see Albert Hall because the Verge Hotel blocks the view from the west. There is a real grief with losses such as this. Bit by bit, we lose our uniqueness. When you approve bigger and higher developments, then you set the precedent for further bigger developments. We do not have to change the soul of Launceston just because someone wants to make $1 out of it. It is up to us, not a developer, to decide how we want our city to be in the future. Please vote no.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next statement is from Martin Cole of Liffey. There is no post-COVID world. This is the beginning of our personal hygiene imperative, individual and collective responsibility. As a council, you have voted that we are in a climate emergency. Are the flights going to return in the numbers they were before? It is a gamble for any business. Will a construction workplace practice secure a COVID-free site? Will large hotels and conferences be the attraction they once were? What if a conference centre has an outbreak? So what does this plan have that justifies the risks? Boxes with facade texture. Launceston has a reputation for an innovative architectural design school, yet we do not demand excellence and innovation in design for our new projects. It is appalling, particularly in this case as its heritage value would have incorporated an art gallery and its proximity to the Albert Hall and Royal Gardens. Now is the time to reduce numbers to boutique hotels and conference spaces that demand attendance, rather than this cheap fill that is a bit on the nose for its rushed, hollow beige throwaway design. Without labouring a point, another effluent tower that only 20% will overflow into the river at a king tide. Let us hope this will not happen as the COVID carrier stays for a long weekend. Do I need to mention the height? Of course I must. If quality design was the intention, maxing out on size would not be the result. It's a first point giveaway that the brief was after a scale war. This is inappropriate for future developments in Launceston. Make Launceston a destination of distinction that demands return business. As a city, we will need to provide points of difference, and in this century, it needs to include innovation, design, and community. Please consider and vote no to this design.
Thank you. Next.
The next submission is from Jack Davenport of Blackwall. I wish to relay my opposition to the proposed building of the Fragrance Hotel. I share the legitimate concerns that the construction of the hotel will interfere with the heritage values of the area. However, my principal concern is that in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, the economic situation facing the city and the state has altered significantly, making the assumptions the proposal was based on unsafe. We're in a position that the future economic situation of Tasmania, and indeed the rest of the world, will be in a state of significant decline and at best significant state of flux for some time. In addition, presumptions regarding how the economic system will function in view of the climate emergency challenge also raise serious questions about viability. Put simply, the proposal is based on the economy developing in a certain way. In a recession, the hotel will simply not be viable. The tourism sector is likely to take a big double hit, both through the pandemic and the likely recession, or worse, depression. This will depress potential custom and it will become an empty eyesore. There is no benefit to supporting a business that is doomed to fail. There is also the risk that initially it takes custom from other existing hotels and accommodation in the city area, putting those sites out of business, only then to fail itself. It is not a good bet for the future of the city. Launceston will need a lot of support and positive development to survive future challenges. This hotel was not a good answer for Launceston's future challenge to begin with. Now it is totally unviable.
Thank you. So
The next submission is from Victoria Wilkinson of Launceston. I'm not going to mention the planning scheme. Instead, my 300 words are a plea for Council not to continue facilitating the transformation of Launceston by stealth, but mostly it is a plea to the proponents to rethink their $50 million spend. Relative to Launceston, this is a mega hotel and it's not the kind of development we need. You bought the site for $6 million. What about spending $20 million and doing something really special, not something you can find anywhere? Sorry, your hotel plans are boring and intrusive. You see Tasmanian tourism is not about one-week packages exploring a hotel. Your development smacks of this. Last year you said, to get the layout right as the owner, I must be involved. You cannot entrust the design and layout to the architect alone. So what will happen next? There is an absence of specific information about final materials and finishes proposed to be used in the development. So what we see may not be what we get. It's a worry, but do we really need what you have to offer? Your proposal would dominate the precinct rather than be part of a progressive and measured growth of this area. And does Tasmania need the kind of tourism we specialise in? At this time in history, we can rethink our tourism industry and what hotels are best suited. Mega look at me, impersonal towers for tourists passing by are not Tasmanian. Infill building at a human scale for living and bespoke accommodation is what we need. Would this project get through the major projects bill? Yes, it would. Would it be divisive and unpopular? Yes, it would. Council, please reject this proposal and oppose the major projects bill. Lastly, if only Council could purchase the Harrops building for the harvest market, I dream.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Next submission is from Anne Leighton-Bennett of Swan Bay. In support of my submission, I would like to reiterate the following. Launceston has an excellent and justified reputation for architectural elegance. It is currently a very livable city of moderate size, but the livability that has made it such a desirable place to both visit and relocate to now appears more and more to be under threat. This seriously risks and undermines our city's enviable reputation, killing the goose that laid the golden egg, to coin a phrase. I therefore urge the Council to consider the Resource Management Planning Appeals Tribunal decision that successfully overturned the City of Launceston's approval for the controversial Gorge Hotel project because the building height is not compatible with the streetscape and the character of the surrounding area. Given the current challenges on travel and tourism resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic and the increasing profitability, it will take years before the tourist industry locally or globally recovers. I question the need or economic value in approving a massive hotel complex when there is every chance it will be an unwelcome, unsightly and empty white elephant that ratepayers will be stuck with for years. As it stands, I consider this project is flawed and totally inappropriate for Launceston. As such, it should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a statement from Clementine Blackman of Launceston. I am a big fan of this beautiful structure. This heritage genre building has significant architectural merit and I would implore that it be maintained as a facade. Another hotel in Launceston is surely not advisable. Our largest event is Mona Foma, which attracts just over 5,000 odd individual visitors per annum. Even with the university's expansion, the need for hotel accommodation can surely be easily met by Silos, Grand Chancellor and the throngs of other accommodation options, including the newly built travesty in the Old Markets car park. Council should consider more soundly the option to create something with greater public benefit than another hotel. I do not support the building of the Fragrance Hotel on this site. The brand itself does not align with the boutique and special nature of the structure and would be a very unsuitable building in an already oversaturated market. Has Council taken into consideration all the existing small boutique economy accommodation that this would economically destroy?
Thank you. Next.
The next submission is from Evie Wood of West Launceston. My concern with this development is that the height and the ugliness of the proposed hotel amongst an area of beautiful and aesthetically pleasing old buildings. Also, how can the City of Launceston think that the type of tourism it will attract will benefit our economy, with tourist buses in and out of on package tours that are aimed at further lining of the developers' pockets? There are so many better ways that the above developers' money could be spent to enhance our City of Launceston. A smaller, more sensitive to surrounds hotel. The Harrops building and ground floor of the said hotel could be turned into an amazing undercover harvest and artisan market to rival that of Salamanca Market, not limited by the vagaries of the weather and the opportunity for stall holders to have a prestige site for their craft and produce and for the kind of tourism we should be attracting. That is, independent travellers who want to come to Launceston and Tasmania for the right reasons, to see our beautiful low-rise city, to support local business, to visit our wonderful gorge and natural environment, and to purchase goods made by our talented producers and artisans, which has a flow-on effect in stimulating the economy. The local economy. I can see a future with Launceston being sold out to overseas developers for short-term gain, and a strange belief that we must kowtow to big money, which seems to prevail at the present time. It may be considered moving with the times, however, one must think about overseas tourism taking a huge hit from COVID-19 at this time in history. I strongly urge the City of Launceston to reject this development and think instead for long-term gain in our beautiful city.
Thank you. And next.
The next submission is from Mr. Graham Gilmore of Launceston. If the Council does not approve this development, we may as well go back to the 1950s. When will people wake up to the fact that we need responsible development in the city? You've already said goodbye to responsible developers in Errol Stewart and Joe Cromie. Councillors, do you really want Launceston to be a backwater on behalf of your own ideals, or are you representing the silent majority who want to see our city grow and have jobs and prosperity? Just wake up.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next submission is from Adrian Lim of Global Premium Hotels Limited, Melbourne, Victoria. Dr. James Coe, owner of Global Premiums Hotel Limited, has always had an affiliation with Tasmania since his first visit some 20 years ago, and in fact it was among our first investment in our ongoing venture into Australia. In terms of the number of development sites, 2/3 of our investments are in Tasmania, and that goes to show the level of conviction and commitment we have in the state. Since purchasing the site in Launceston some 4 years ago, we have actively engaged with all levels of government, presented our proposals and made multiple amendments to our plans based on their feedback. This led us to acquiring 2 adjoining properties, allowing for a slightly longer but lower building design, which maintains the room count to make it a viable proposition for our internationally branded hotel operator. Throughout our interactions in Launceston, we have engaged with many positive and forward-looking mindsets. To incorporate these new ideas, we devoted additional time and resources to collaboratively refine the project. We believe what we have put together in this development application is the cumulative effort of all levels of government, and the proposed hotels will showcase all that Launceston has to offer for business, tourists and visitors alike. We believe that Launceston has long been overlooked by visitors, especially conference visitors, due to lack of conference facilities and number of rooms, and we want to make the change. This project, if approved, will provide jobs and opportunities for all in Launceston, both during construction and operation. Notwithstanding that we are undergoing an unprecedented challenging time with this COVID-19 issue, we remain committed to Launceston and believe that together we can make this development a reality. And that is all.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a statement from Moira Wellman, Launceston Heritage Not High Rise of Lagana. Launceston Heritage Not High Rise emphasises it is of the utmost importance for environmental, health and safety reasons that councillors understand that this development application acknowledges that various parts of the site comprise potentially contaminated land, as the land was historically subject to potentially contaminating activities. The application fails to provide all the information required to be provided by the potentially contaminated land code of the Launceston Interim Planning Scheme 2015, particularly in respect of clause 2.6.2 P1, which relevantly requires an environmental site assessment, any specific remediation and protection measures required to be implemented before excavation commences, and a statement that the excavation does not adversely impact on human health or the environment. It is contended that any document submitted by the proponents or their representatives fails to meet the definition of an environmental site assessment under the scheme. In fact, in a letter from Consultants Environmental Management and Consulting to the developer's architects dated 21 January 2019, the authors admitted that more detailed site investigations were required in order to satisfy the requirements of the Launceston Interim Planning Scheme 2015. The proponents have indicated in their development application that it proposes that appropriate investigations will be undertaken after the development and use has been approved. This is not satisfactory. Consequently, Launceston Heritage Not High Rise contends, as the application does not include a valid environmental site assessment as required by clauses E2.5.1 P1 and E2.6.2 P1 of the potentially contaminated land code of the scheme, the development application should be rejected. As a footnote, Launceston Heritage Not High Rise also emphasises to councillors that in Victoria, councillors have successfully sued for approving rezoning. In Victoria, councils have been successfully sued for approving rezoning and developing land permits for land that is contaminated, even where those permits have been subject to requirements that comprehensive assessments be carried out.
Thank you.
The next submission is by Linda Collier of Lagana. Launceston is a beautiful, much loved and respected city full of delightful historic architecture, mainly as a result of the efforts of its foresighted forefathers with their passion for beautiful Victorian buildings. I'd like to refer you to the Girl Architects Report of 2011, where it is said that Launceston should respect and cherish the heritage buildings, that it should maintain the historical low-rise city and make sure that new areas obtain similar qualities, and we should protect, develop and refine the qualities that already exist. Gill also said that Launceston should develop planning controls for the inner city area to maintain the present average building height of maximum 5-storey, approximately 15 metres, with a general height of 3 or 4 stories. These quotes are from the report commissioned by the Launceston City Council. Why are you not listening and adhering to your own reports instead of wasting ratepayers' money on commissioning reports which you pay absolutely no attention to? I implore you to reject this development application as the people of Launceston would prefer. As it says on the city's coat of arms, progress with prudence.
Thank you. Next.
The next submission is from Jim Collier of Lagana. I sincerely hope all Launceston City Councillors have read my personal representation, which was forwarded to them a few days ago. I have little to add to that other than to highlight the following. The Development Manager in the Examiner recently referred in a rather disparaging manner to just 60 representations received in respect of the Fragrance Hotel proposal. However, there were significantly more representations received for this DA than for the doomed Gorge Hotel, and not one of these representations supported the proposal. All opposed it, indicative of the fact that there is considerable community angst in relation to the proposed Fragrance Hotel. It is of particular significance that even the proprietors of the Verge Hotel, Stay Tasmania, submitted a representation opposing the project. Stay Tasmania should feel rightly affronted if Launceston City Council decide to approve the development application in the light of the efforts they went to obtain approval for the Verge Hotel. Planner Paul Davies said in his 2018 report, Launceston is not seen as a city of tall or large-scale buildings, but rather a unique collection of buildings of generally very consistent scale and form that sets Launceston apart from other cities in Australia. Urban planners Gell Architects said in their 2011 report for Launceston City Council that Launceston should maintain the historical low-rise city and make sure that new areas obtain similar qualities. In conclusion, I'd like to advise councillors that when recently delivering a lecture at the University of Tasmania, well-known local identity and historian Dr. Eric Ratcliffe stated, Launceston's future lies in its past. Thank you for listening to my views, which I hope you'll keep in mind while deliberating on your decision.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next is from Ken Partridge of West Launceston. This statement has been made possible by a literally last-minute access to my own archive in the absence of the usual but now COVID-19 locked down research opportunities facilities. I therefore wish to raise the following precedent of which councillors may not be aware. On 21 October 1991, the Planning Appeal Board handed down decision J101/91 that was, briefly, determined by traffic matters in which access egress site distances were assessed as allowing no margin for error. The development proposed was for 7 houses at 138 Elfin Road, Launceston. Councillors will no doubt know it as Fairlawn. Given that the proposed Fragrance Hotel would generate a comparatively huge number of traffic movements, but in an arterial road setting not unlike the Fairlawn situation, it is not unreasonable for you as our representatives to question the efficiency of the developer's traffic impact assessment, ? The indefatigable Jerry Land, our pro bono traffic expert, is sadly no longer with us. And I, as earlier explained, have been unable to go into this in any depth, but even so, my gut feeling is that you should all take on this responsibility with the utmost concern and diligence. Jack Munday was another indefatigable who should be remembered for his passionate defence of a Sydney landmark that has been challenged vociferously by developers' greed. You have done well, Jack. Your spirit lives on. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next statement is from Gillian Zacks. With regard to the Fragrance Hotel development application, I would respectfully request that this application be rejected for many reasons, including that the building is far too tall and inappropriate for the area. The visual impact on the landscapes will be detrimental to our beautiful gorge area in particular. Several very tall and unattractive buildings have sadly been built in our city since 1960, and this is no reason to allow more. Visitors come to our city to appreciate our heritage buildings and natural gorge area, and increased traffic will cause further congestion. These are just a few of many reasons this application should be rejected. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And next.
Next submission is by Fiona Ferguson of Windermere. After travelling extensively and living in different countries, I deliberately chose to return to Tasmania and live in Launceston. This is because it offers exceptional and unique lifestyle qualities that are not found easily elsewhere, and becoming even less so as we live in an ever-changing world. I believe it would be killing the golden goose if this development were to go ahead. I have not seen any research showing concrete proof that this idea is good for our city at all levels that consider equally the social, environmental and economical aspects. My particular concerns are: 1. Visitors come here to see a beautifully unadulterated town with history and charm, not more of the same. Charm does not include 40-metre high rise buildings. 2. Visually, it will change forever, the landscape that represents home for so many Tasmanians. This has a significant bearing on our sense of place and home for stability and trust in our community. 3. There is no guarantee that once there is one high-rise building, it will not pave the way for more and we become desensitised. We forget that what we once had, and we lose the magic of our city as decades sneak by. 4. There is not a strong sense of trust in Tasmanian politics, and we are justifiably cautious about the future. We need to be cautious at the moment as we observe patiently and intelligently. 5. Given the current COVID pandemic, there is no guarantee in the foreseeable future that travel and tourism will return to normal, possibly turning this project into a complete financial nightmare with far-reaching effects. I therefore consider this project to be flawed in its planning and totally inappropriate for the people of Launceston. It should be rejected.
Thank you.
The next submission is from Mr. Lionel Morrell at the Tasmanian Ratepayers Association Incorporated of Launceston. We note the 60 representations that have been made in relation to this application, none of which unusually are in support of the development of this very large hotel development. Accordingly, there's nothing even close to representing a social licence for the project. One representative, Mr. Lyndon Jago of Verge Hotel, makes reference to the adverse impact this large increase in hotel rooms will have on existing hotel operations in the city. We note and agree that these owners are important ratepayers and employers of locals. The newly completed Verge Hotel is yet to come online, and the Solos Hotel has still not reached operating capacity. Anecdotal comments received by our association indicate that other operators such as the Siebel in St John Street also, we advise, believe that the addition of a large new facility will threaten the viability of existing tourist accommodation operations and threaten employment levels. Apart from some niche area improvements, conference facilities and the like, they say nothing further is warranted for the foreseeable future. Of course, since this application was compiled, the world has been struck by a serious economic blow by the coronavirus epidemic, and forecasters are saying that it will be years before the tourism industry and international travel will be restored. Accordingly, we submit that it would be irresponsible for councillors to approve this development today because of the serious impacts on the financial viability of existing accommodation facilities and the impact on their existing employment levels beyond council's approval of upgrading of the existing Clarion Hotel section.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next is from John Perry of the Coordinator General's Office. As Tasmania's Coordinator General, I strongly support this vitally important planning scheme compliant proposal for Launceston, an extraordinary investment in our city. I enthusiastically back the design aspects of the exceptional accommodation, conference and retail spaces, and particularly the economic benefits this project will bring Launceston, especially to business events. We have been working with the proponent for 4 years on this investment. I am rapt with their level of work and rework to deliver a commercially feasible outcome that beautifully incorporates and responds to heritage and yet cleverly navigates the location's many challenging constraints. Instead of a new hotel volume consuming the site, it is set back and elevated, enabling a permeable ground plane. This ultimately produces a slender, taller built form and a defining design statement. Demand drivers like this genuine 5-star internationally branded hotel with distinctive design and high-end offerings will be the most significant hotel investment our city has ever experienced. It could easily be another generation or never for another comparable opportunity. We know Launceston is capable of performing much better in business events, but it is lacking large enough quality infrastructure to support greater capture, particularly the high-yielding corporate and incentives segment. Launceston's first 200-plus room hotel will transform our business events offering. Tasmania needs more accommodation development that adds to Tasmania's unique character. This proposal develops that and so much more, beautifully incorporating our city's heritage and delivering facilities we know we need. In these unprecedented, challenging times, this project's economic potential is even more important. New market access is the key to restoring and growing visitation to our city. Make no mistake, getting airlines to bring back capacity post-COVID-19 will be challenging and fiercely competitive. This development will differentiate Launceston from other Australian regional cities. We will desperately need that. Please exercise your discretion to support. And that is it.
Thank you. Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mayor. The next statement is from June Burnett of Windermere. Take a step back and look at history, Council's mistakes of the past, removing heritage buildings like the Mechanics Institute, etc. Imagine pulling down the Town Hall. Telstra, Myer, circa 1959, and Henty House, huge mistakes. Stating that we already have these high buildings is not a reason to pass this oversized fragrance hotel. Current councillors can make up for these mistakes and preserve what remains of our historical city. I sincerely hope you can see what is happening. The Verge Hotel, dark brown brick, not in keeping with CBD heritage buildings, 24 metres, it does not fit in with Launceston's historical streetscape. Now Launceston City Council have accepted the DA of a 44-metre hotel and recommending it be passed as per today's agenda. I thought the decision to pass or reject DAs is up to councillors, the very people that are voted in by residents and ratepayers to do the right thing and respect the wishes of these same residents. Please do not allow developers to take over and destroy our city. It obviously means nothing to them, but means a whole lot to tourists and residents. It is almost too late for Hobart to retain their historical buildings or to find them amongst high-rises. You used to see views across the Derwent on approaching Hobart. The views have gone due to high buildings surrounding it. I beg you, do not let it happen in Launceston. The current Clarion Hotel and the Harrops Warehouse are already of significant size. The interior and height could produce many hotel rooms as well as car spaces, a moderate restaurant. No need to have retail, businesses, gyms within these hotels. People staying at the hotel are within walking distance to support the existing CBD businesses. Should this DA be passed, you will be paving the way to no height limits. The sky is the limit. I urge you, this DA must be rejected.
Thank you. And next.
The next submission's from Russell and Ives of West Launceston. I walked the site late yesterday and viewed from every vantage point. It was overwhelming to estimate the magnitude of this development by a $1.4 billion company, head of fragrance, which is currently buying hotels in cities like Bath in the UK rather than funding further developments within Australia and Asia. Beyond logic, that is, an edifice like this proposal could be considered acceptable for this site. The Telstra building and Myer at particular heights are generally abhorred, so it is not okay for more of the same. Both inhibit the viewpoints across the CBD. The Verge Hotel closes the vision off from other landmarks, including the Albert Hall, and is visible as a big towering block shadowing me as I walk along Cimetière Street to cross into Tamer Street. Another high-rise in the area would blacken the view further, especially at eventide. Bath is one of those cities that has protections against high-rise buildings. The value economically is the concentrated historical architecture. If you have lived in Launceston for 40 years or more, as I have, you'd be imbued with the magnificent heritage that we have and its history. Knowing the history would immediately register the importance of the Albert Hall, not just for residents, but more for every visitor who comments on the intact and incredible continuity of unique heritage buildings. I have shared with many a visitor and learned much of Launceston's history. The economic value of planning rules that places limits on the height of buildings in the city area and the restoration of heritage buildings could be a huge training and employment opportunity if council was brave enough to pursue restoration.
Thank you. And next?
The next submission is by Mr. Peter Reynolds of the Heritage Protection Society in Launceston. We draw councillors' attention to a letter by Jerry Lev, Atelier for Building and Urban Design, published today in the Examiner newspaper. This is summarised to comply with the 300-word limit. We chose Tasmania, specifically Launceston, for its unspoiled heritage and natural character. Most Australian and international cities have lost their charm to vast clusters of oversized, generic, characterless buildings taking over swathes of their skylines. Launceston is a truly unique city in Australia and globally. However, without a very careful, deliberate approach to planning, within a few years Launceston can easily become just another ugly, anonymous place barely visited. The Fragrance Hotel proposal is to be commended for preserving their heritage street facades. This is the first and unfortunately often also the only step taken by some architects in preserving the character of the place. This proposal's consideration for its surroundings ends right behind the old street facades. What happens behind and high above can only be described as a chaotic stack of randomly placed blocks. Is it at a hospital in Sao, a Shanghai shopping mall, a Perth casino? There's no way to tell. The proposal aims at 12 stories, double or triple what would suit its location, without even utilising the space available below. With its worst facade directly facing City Park, a massive 5-storey block sits on top of 2 concrete columns towering 20 metres above the existing heritage buildings as in a final poignant gesture. It can only be seen as a poorly considered and giving insufficient regard to its surroundings from any perspective other than its own. The overall height can and must be reduced. The exterior facades must be redesigned to complement the character of the city. It represents an open door to destruction of the tourism draw by the unique character of Launceston.
Thank you. And next?
Okay, this submission is from Laurie Scanlon of Scanlon Architects, Perth, Western Australia. Scanlon Architects thanks Council for the opportunity to speak in support of this exciting project. The 230-room 5-star hotel and conference facilities meet a need well documented in strategic city reports and public discourse, most recently by Michael Ferguson, Minister for State Growth, Infrastructure and Transport, who said, quote, "This is an important project for our city. We can and should be attracting national and international conferences to our beautiful northern capital that currently only Hobart can attract. But we cannot do that without the conference facility and the rooms. We support this development going ahead, which will, I think, sit quite beautifully in a stage offset from the street, recognising the heritage of the Harrops warehouse cited on Tasmania Talks 4 May 2020, unquote. We appreciate architecture is subjective, but thank the Minister for his comments and his government support. The hotel's design setbacks progressively from the street and benchmarks building heights within the immediate streetscape and city context when viewed at a distance. Conserving 3 heritage listed buildings is at the heart of the proposal, recognised by consent from THC. Equally important is retention of 3 non-listed structures contributing to precinct character and the overall design. The unlisted Rankin and Bond and 130 Cimetière Street frontages collectively provide continuity of the streetscape's human scale and the heritage listed places they adjoin, being the Brass Founders Building and the warehouse's brick wall. In theory, demolishing the unlisted 2-storey stables and car park behind the existing hotel permits construction up to 4 stories or discretionally greater. In contrast, we have preserved the stables building and adapted the car park into a landscape piazza. The historic hotel and stables will transform into a boutique 55-room offering, complementing the city's much-loved niche small hotel market. With broad support from government and wider public, together with the THC permit granting heritage works, we respectfully request Council approve this transformational development as recommended by the city's planning report. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any others?
No, thank you, Mayor. That's all the submissions for this item.
I did have one on the list for Fiona Ferguson on the list here.
That was on the list twice, Mayor, and we have read that one. Yes,
okay,
thank you.
Cool. Thank you. We'll move on. Is anybody prepared to have a motion on 9.1? Any councillors?
I'm happy to move that, Mayor.
Councillor Finlay is moving. Is there a seconder?
Second, Mayor.
Councillor Mackenzie? Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak to it?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. In moving this item today, I want to acknowledge the significant effort provided by both locals and people from afar who have an interest and a passion for Launceston with their representations. I also want to acknowledge the developer in this instance in the efforts over a long period of time to many times responds to the very direct feedback from the City of Launceston in regards to initial developments as submitted. There was a comment in one of the representations today, one of the people that spoke to the item today about the documentation and the designs and plans being rushed. I can assure the Launceston community how, although some members may not appreciate or enjoy the design solutions that have been delivered or want to see a development of this significance in the city, that this has been a process that has occurred over many years and has had a number of submissions for early consideration and has changed drastically through that feedback. So I want to acknowledge the community, the developer and the officers of the City of Launceston for their persistence in their feedback and the way they've been clear and direct in terms of the feedback to get us to this point. I want to acknowledge that the development application today has received a conditional approval from the Tasmanian Heritage Council, and I think that is significant where many of the concerns presented have been in regards to the heritage nature, not only of the fabric on site, but in terms of the characteristics of the precinct in the area. So the conditioned approval of the Tasmanian Heritage Council, I believe, is important. I want to acknowledge also in the report that responds, highlights and responds to the discretions in this application, that there are many discretions. And I think our role as a planning authority is to consider each of the elements of the development application as submitted and give serious regard to any discretions and interrogate the reasonableness of those. They're all outlined in the report and the responses also are outlined. And on balance, it is our job to consider how this meets the requirements of the scheme and where discretions are at play, how reasonable they are to consider. That is in my mind that these discretions are met with the measure of reasonableness. I think it's important to acknowledge the framework of the planning scheme, but also as outlined in the report, this development is consistent with a much higher level strategic intention of the area. The Greater Launceston Plan anticipates development like this, and the City of Launceston's own Horizon 2021 economic development strategy also contemplates the need for development such as this within the community. I think it's also important to note elements of a number of the representations where they reflect on our current circumstances, that we find ourselves in a drastically shifted environment, both economically and socially, in terms of the current impacts of the coronavirus. Subject to this being approved today, subject to it going through, no doubt, an appeals process, and then with a DA approved or not at the end of that process, consideration by the developer to continue financially to proceed. It will be some time before we see this breaking ground and at completion. And it is my hope that the foundations of our community and the work that we've done to become a destination, the work that we continue to do with understanding and presenting our DNA, and the work the government is doing in rolling out our recovery plans, that when we find that time, this will actually, as the Coordinator General outlined, deliver a point of difference for our community to work through and support our recovery. I want to speak to the materiality and the form of the development application, and where, with consideration of height and setback and bulk, characteristic and streetscape, this development application has submitted, I think, with regard for Launceston as a city and the immediate precinct. I enjoy the solution that's been delivered in terms of a variety of forms, a variety of height, a variety of setback, a variety of materiality. I think, however, it's not a design from hundreds of years ago. It's a contemporary design that does speak to the variety of form around Launceston, that we have one of the most...
Excuse me, Councillor Finlay, you have gone your time. Do you need an extension?
If that's okay, Mayor.
Yeah, that is okay if somebody moves it.
So move, Mr Mayor, Deputy.
Move, Deputy Mayor, second.
Mr Mayor.
Deputy move.
Councillor Harris seconded, I think it was.
Councillor
All
Harris.
those, yeah, I've got that. Councillor Harris second. All those in favour, just say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? No. So you have another 3 minutes. Thank you, Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mayor. That I think the variety of form and a materiality does speak to the variety that we find within the full architectural catalogue of Launceston, from our industrial structures within the precinct, residential, commercial. I think there has been regard in this design solution. I wanted to talk about elements of traffic and car parking. I do really like the way this developer has resolved access and egress to the site, both through William Street and Cimetière Street. I think the solution of the porte cochere at the front for access and egress, but the Euro Plaza off William Street, thank you, Deputy Mayor, I had to give it a go, but the Euro Plaza off William Street, I think the way we have wanted to activate our city through laneways and provide those sort of features, I think that's been done in a really lovely way within the requirements of it as a development application in the planning scheme. So for me, you will see this building, if it's approved and constructed, I think we need to acknowledge really clearly that you will see it, but for me, I'll celebrate it. And I think as a community, we can't hide from the fact it is a significant form. It will have a significant presence, but I think assessment against the scheme says that it is worthy of approval. So in balanced consideration against the scheme with all the discretions, with response to the very strong positions of the community in terms of the representations, on reflection of my own very robust and rigorous debates with members in the community about certain elements, with the conditioned approval of the Heritage Council, I commend this application before Council today.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Councillor McKenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I scribbled down lots of comments during the reading out of the representations prior to the meeting, or during the meeting, and I'm not quite sure where to start, but a number of those I note aren't in relation to planning. They like the feel, and note that we're sitting here today as a planning authority, and therefore we need to do it in relation to the Planning Act. Things like, you know, the development would be better if it was an art gallery or a harvest market. The properties have been vacant for a long period of time, and therefore those developments haven't come to the board, so therefore somebody's determined that they're not appropriate for us to deal with. Prague, I read that letter this morning, one of my favourite cities in the world, but I noticed there are a number of big buildings and they live in harmony with a lot of other buildings in and around that city as well. But I'll start, and thank you, Councillor Finlay, you always segue well into a lot of things, and I'll attack it slightly from a different angle. And I guess I'm going to deal with it in relation to a number of factors, and I'll start with height and bulk. That's without question the biggest issue raised by all of the representations, and probably the most difficult of the performance criteria to assess as a layperson. There is no doubt the scale of the building is larger than anything that has been ever built in Launceston. I note that I voted in favour of the Gorge Hotel DA some months ago, with the council's favourable decision overturned on appeal by the Planning Tribunal. There is no doubt that that building was intended to be a statement on the landscape and designed to be seen, The tribunal said the building height is not compatible with the streetscape and the character of the surrounding area. This statement has been used by many of the representors in their submission. But to do that statement justice, you need to look at the streetscape and the character of the area surrounding this development. It is completely different to a different area of the city, and there is currently new and old development that would represent this area differently. In relation to new developments, we have the Verge Hotel across the road, the developments proposed on the gasworks site being an art gallery and car park, the new UTAS developments at Willis Street, which is changing the landscape of the city. This added to the existing built form of Bogue's Brewery, the Mons and Affleck Flour Mill, Albert Hall, Hotel Grand Chancellor and the Telstra building show that the built character of this area is quite different to Lower Harrison Street. So how tall is too tall? The building certainly will test that, and clearly is the level of representation against it. Some of the representations reference the work done by Paul Davey on building height performance criteria in circa 2018. Those items have been discussed by the public and council, but are yet to be adopted into the Launceston interim planning scheme. So we're still assessing under current performance criteria. But I will reference one of the comments he made, which was the scale needs to be looked at in reference to the streetscape, meaning that anything hard to the street will look and feel taller if it is hard to the street edge, as opposed to buildings that are set back from the street. This is what the architects have endeavoured to do with their scaling in this development, such that the street level of Symmetry Street and Tamer Street, the existing frontage remains, and consequently at street level nothing much changes. No doubt when you look up, size is there, but it rises in sections as the building recedes into the block. Said that, there's no doubt from William Street the size is magnified, primarily as the neighbouring property has very little building on it. There are certainly other vantage points around the city that the building will stand out, but many of them are from a distance, like Windmill Hill and West Launceston, where the scale more easily blends in. I also looked at the development from City Park viewpoint, and certainly you'll get a good view of the development from the proximity of the Albert Hall car park. But on scaling, due to the close proximity of the gasworks, it does not seem significantly out of proportion to the size and scale of that building. I suspect it will remain a debatable issue as to size and scaling depending on how you view things, just as what represents ugly architecture and good architecture. I know one of the representors reflected on the ugly UTAS combination development at Inveresk. I actually quite like that development, so there's very much in the eye of the beholder. And one architect sitting in the room with another is likely to have different views on what is good and what is bad. Noting I'm aware of one who believes in Maine this is a good architectural design. I also note we have professional planners giving us advice on the merits of this development and how it fits in with the performance criteria of the scheme. They have been through an exhaustive process with the developer prior to making their recommendation. I thank them for their diligence and time to answer councillor and questions from the public and respect their professional competence in making the recommendation to approve the development application. I'll just also note that this development, as Councillor Finlay said, didn't start out where we've ended up. It's come a long way from the original representation that was made to council. So there's been a lot of work done by the developer in conjunction with the council officers to come up with a development which fits the scheme. This decision will never sit easily with some, no matter what decision we make, but on balance, I'll be supporting the recommendation. I thought I'd then address heritage impacts, a detailed conservation.
Your time's up, Councillor Mackenzie, so if we could have an extension.
Yes, I would, please.
Somebody happy to move that?
Yeah.
Councillor Soward. Councillor Soward and seconded. Councillor Spencer. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
Any against? No, that's carried. Thank you. You may continue, Councillor Mackenzie.
In relation to heritage impacts, a detailed conservation plan has been prepared for the site. The DA has been reviewed by the Tasmanian Heritage Council and subject to conditions consents to the discretionary permit being granted. And I'm comfortable with the judgment they have made and note those conditions will form part of the permit. A traffic impact assessment has been made, and I note this has been made in relation to the development and is in isolation to other new developments that will occur in the vicinity, such as the Verge Hotel, Gasworks developments and UTAS. I referenced this to our infrastructure department and they advised that they are comfortable that this use in combination with other known activities will not adversely impact on the road network. Shadowing. The impact of shadowing was raised by a number of representatives and our officers have reviewed the diagrams and advised that shadowing meets the acceptable standard. Sewerage and stormwater, both Taswater and our council infrastructure department have determined our existing sewer and water services are able to cater for the development. Jurisdictional issues, TAS networks and contamination were raised by representatives, and our officers' response adequately deal with these issues. Economic issues. We're a planning authority, do not make judgment on the economic outcomes of a project. That is fundamentally up to the market to determine. Whilst the current economic climate may question the wisdom of a development such as this and its impacts on other market players, that is not the purview of our role as a planning authority, and that judgment lies with the developer. This decision will never sit easily with some, no matter what decision we make, but in a democratic world, I defend the right to have an opinion and appreciate the contributions made by everyone. But on balance, I will be supporting this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Deputy Mayor, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I will. Mayor, firstly, I wish to recognise both those who have provided representations and indeed those that have had their views further read into today's meeting. I understand that contributing to our council meeting via that means has been a challenge for some, but it is nonetheless appreciated. And in my view, there's no denying that this is a very significant building, relying, as the mover and the seconder have mentioned, on many discretions asked of us in today's assessment. I'd like to commend our staff on the very detailed report that has been provided. It's very detailed, it's very comprehensive, and it's certainly appreciated. In my view, it's important today to consider the application against the scheme, not to consider the need for another hotel, not to consider if the impact of COVID or the other wide-spanning creativity of some of the concerns raised into the representations should be indeed reason for approving or not the hotel that has been put before us. But it is my view that our growing and evolving Launceston Mayor needs to provide contemporary uses and facilities for both residents and indeed visitors. Now, one of the representatives today said that people come here because they like Launceston the way it is. It's my view, though, Mayor, that the proposal promotes the reuse of heritage buildings and heritage fabric, and that's at the very core of the DA. You know, someone else said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but that visitors to Tasmania come to view the history of the state recorded in its heritage buildings. And again, it's my view that this proposal promotes heritage and the heritage buildings and the fabric of our city. I think, Mayor, it's important to consider that central to the assessment of this application under the scheme is the need, as the mover and seconder have said, to determine whether the proposal is compatible with the streetscape and the character of the surrounding area. And I note that the great depth that was provided by our planning officers and was included in the report in this regard. I also note the conserving of 3 heritage listing buildings is at the heart of this proposal in the dense urban area, and that really should be highlighted. It's my view that the assessment suggests that the area is capable of accommodating the change proposed without significantly impacting on the fabric of our city, or indeed how it is perceived by visitors or residents. And that's not to take away from anyone who's got a differing opinion or anyone who has their worries or concerns. But I do think that it's important to note that whilst not, of course, part of the planning scheme, that construction means estimated spend approaching $60 million, and that's not insignificant. So you've heard the mover and the seconder talk about the size, talk about the materiality of the DA, and also, you know, the stepping back of the design. And I think that for me is really important, and I really appreciate the way that the developer has worked with the council to effect those changes. The setback to ensure that the ground floor presents to the street as 2-3 stories with active frontages, and then, as I mentioned, the height stepping back within the site. I think that these qualities, the active frontages, the variation in materiality, as Councillor Finlay and Councillor Mackenzie said, and the opportunities for visual and physical permeability do create lively and engaging streets. Mayor, in conclusion, I want to say that It's my view that the introduction of a premium branded hotel to Launceston is important. It's certainly strategically aligned with the city that I want to help create for the future. I think the DA complies with the planning scheme, and to the extent that I feel comfortable in supporting the discretions asked of us. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Soward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and like those before me, I wanted to acknowledge the time taken by those that made a representation that were read out in their entirety earlier in the meeting. And I do note, Mr. Mayor, that within those representations, there's obviously a significant amount of passion and feeling, and a number of those people didn't live in Launceston, so they obviously felt passionate enough about it to write to us and share their views, and I'm appreciative of that, and that's a really important part of the process. I'm going to start, Mr. Mayor, in my remarks. I'm obviously, there's been much that's been said by Councillor Finlay, Councillor Mackenzie, and the Deputy Mayor that I am in total agreement with, so I won't repeat that, other than to say that I value their contributions and support the remarks that they've made. I want to focus on a couple of different things to add to the argument, to the discussion, I should say. And as I often do, Mr. Mayor, when I read a report that's put to us, I always start with the representations and the responses by our officers. And I want to just say publicly to Mr. Jamieson and General Manager Hurst, in my time on council, this would have to be one of the most thorough, professional reports that I've seen, and I really appreciate their effort and the effort of their staff in putting this together, and the explanations that they've used in providing information to those who have taken the time to provide a representation. So in reading through that, Mr. Mayor, the staff have provided, in my view, very, very detailed answers to the concerns that have been raised, and some of those concerns that were raised and were raised in the verbal submissions we heard earlier were ones that aren't accessible under the planning scheme. They're concerns that people have, and many of them in relation to what we're dealing with at the moment with the COVID-19 challenges. So when we look at the responses that our officers have made, Mr. Mayor, I'm very, very satisfied that the things that have been raised have been addressed, and again, when you read through that application, Mr. Mayor, and the report in front of us, it says very, very clearly in that there are where things are raised that they are indeed met under the scheme, and that's where I want to just head at the moment, Mr. Mayor. When people bring any development application to us, the idea of the application, any application, is that it meets the scheme. And it would be fair, I think, with anyone that brought that to us that that's the case. Obviously, things comply, and we indeed, as a planning authority, deal with that and approve it. In this report in front of us, Mr. Mayor, it's very, very clear when you read it that it complies. The detail that the officers have provided in that assessment highlights in depth where that happens, and I think, again, it's very, very clear. The representations that came to us, both in the that are addressed in the council report and verbally that were read out in the meeting, ironically, Mr. Mayor, for me, a lot of them aren't planning issues. I did find some irony on one hand, where to some who are aggrieved at this application, they said that there'll be buses and traffic, clogging the streets. And others said, well, no one will go there because people won't come to Launceston because of the pandemic. So on one hand, there are some that have concerns that there'll be too much traffic. On others, some are concerned that no one will go there. So again, they're not planning considerations, but I think it's important to highlight, because obviously people do have different views, and that's what makes our community special. And the times we face at the moment are indeed challenging and unknown times. Again, Mr. Mayor, and it's referred to in the report, and the officers make it clear that the aesthetic or the environmental appreciation of a building, it does come down to the individual. I think it was Councillor Mackenzie who said that architects themselves and designers have different views, as we all do, Mr. Mayor. What one person finds attractive, someone else may not particularly like. And again, when we sit as a planning authority, if our prime focus as a planning authority was to approve things that everyone liked, we would never approve anything because people have different views. I come back to my remarks about complying with the scheme, and a very, very important thing for me, Mr. Mayor, as part of that is the detailed report by the Tasmanian Heritage Council, where they outline, I think, 10 conditions with some sub-conditions in there and their reasoning behind that. And given that
Excuse me, Councillor Soward, your time is up. Do you need an extension?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor.
Could I have somebody move and second that?
Happy to move it, Mayor.
Move, Councillor McKenzie.
Second it, Mayor.
Councillor Harris. All those in favour? Yes, Councillor Harris. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Any against? So the ayes have it. Thank you, Councillor Soward. You may continue.
Thank you. As I was saying, there are 10 conditions with some sub-conditions and the reasoning behind it. Given that a number of representations that were made to us and to me personally were around about the heritage of the area, I'm sort of thinking if the Tas Heritage Council have given that conditional approval, that suggests to me that that they're satisfied, and those conditions are very, very clear and obviously have to be followed and dealt with. Just in conclusion, Mr. Mayor, as I've said before and others have said, when we deal with something like this, there is a lot of emotion and, you know, I guess interest in this. This isn't a new thing. I did see some remarks that we shouldn't be dealing with it because we're in this COVID-19 situation. This has been flagged and on the horizon for quite a while now. And I would also say, Mr. Mayor, with full respect to all of those who raised the current situation as a reason for us to knock it back, if I was, or if the developer was as concerned as some people are, given that it's their money that they're putting into it, one could understand if they walked away. You know, we are facing very, very challenging times, but the fact that they believe in this and are committed to this obviously suggests that they believe there is a need for it. And I would say, as I do often with these things that come to us, people wouldn't go and build things at such a cost and a time if there wasn't a perceived need for that. I'll conclude my remarks with, again, reinforcing this development complies with the assessment in the scheme. It's very, very clear as you read through the documentation that it's consistent. Where it relies on performance criteria, it complies. So again, Mr. Mayor, I would say that to anyone, if they bring something to the council that meets the scheme and is consistent with the scheme and complies with the scheme, it would be a fair belief that that would be supported by the council. I won't mention at any length the economic benefit of this because, again, that's not part of the scheme, but those benefits I think are obvious and others have made in their representations very, very clearly what they bring. So I'll be supporting it and I look forward to further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Councillor Cox?
I got there, Mayor. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Look, it's always difficult to follow when others have spoken so eloquently. I am also going to support this heritage approval. It ticks all the boxes, as we've heard so often from Councillor McKenzie. It does tick all the boxes. There is no reason to not support it. For all the reasons that have been given by previous speakers, I also intend to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Stosnicek?
Thanks. Today I offer my enthusiastic support for this proposal. I'm not going to go over some of the points already covered by previous speakers. However, I'm comfortable that it reasonably meets the planning scheme and I'm comfortable with the discretion sought. I believe the developers have listened to the people and have come up with a design which is sensitive to the area. They've broken up the structure and used materials which blend in with the surroundings. Rather than go for a landmark hotel which stands out, it's set back within the block and is designed to blend into surrounding structures. Whilst it can't be argued that it's a large development, I believe that once built, it will simply become a part of our streetscape. As the facades on three sides will be retained, when viewed from close up, the building will be somewhat masked. In a time of uncertainty and economic downturn, if approved, this development offers hope for the future. It offers employment both in the build and once it's operational. It will pave the way for different tourism markets and opportunities such as loyalty club members, large conferences and a 200 plus hotel that we currently miss out on. I will therefore be voting for the proposal as I believe it reasonably meets the planning scheme, and I'm excited about the opportunities this development will provide for the people of Launceston. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Stosnicek. We go to Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. When the Heritage Council gave their conditional approval and it was made public in the media, I reached out to some of my stakeholders through social media, taking a breath, you know, waiting to hear what people would say and expecting a blend of opposition and support. But in actual fact, what I received was the opposite of that. I actually got almost every single person who responded, and there were about 20, 19 were in approval of this plan. So I was very, very happy to hear that. And I'd like to read you a couple of those, please. I'm not going to name the people who wrote them. At first, I was taken aback by the height, but with the planned UTAS building close by in mind and the hotel across the road almost complete, I think it won't look out of context. The textures and colour palette are pretty reasonable and the massing goes well with the surrounding building and the existing buildings it will be attached to. I'm very pleased to see all the existing facades being respected and have carefully considered and incorporated into the development. Now, that young citizen of Launceston's just completed their degree in architecture. So to hear that from them, I was really, really happy. Another one from a local business person who opened a business only months before the pandemic hit. So somebody who's got every reason to be concerned about the future. He thinks it's a good project. Much needed investment and interesting design, which if all goes to plan should add a deal of vibrancy to our city. I don't think it's council's role to second guess whether it will attract visitors or not. That's the investors' call and it's their risk if and when it goes ahead. And I think that's a theme for today, is that none of us know how long it's going to take to come out of the pandemic. We might turn it around in 6 months, it might take a year, it might be longer. Without a crystal ball, there's really no way to tell. And it's clear when we discuss planning matters that people naturally fall into those who are more likely to be conservative around change and those who are more likely to want to see change. And in this incidence, I think we see this opportunity of councillors so far who are willing to see change. We want our city to grow. We need those beautiful heritage buildings to have investment in them. Without investment, the Harrop building is not going to survive into the next century. It needs significant work and it has done for a very long time. So it's welcome from my perspective that somebody is considering spending $60 million in this precinct to plan for something that will, in my mind, be a beautiful building for many years to come. With the conditions that the Heritage Council have put on it, induction processes for workers, the site to understand the heritage sensitivities, archaeological investigations and interpretation plans, these things are all instrumental in giving comfort to the community that the Heritage Council have considered this build and support it. We know that buildings of this bulk and height are not seen in Launceston. We see some tallish buildings and we see some bulky buildings like the Bogues development. But to see them together is clearly confronting for many people. I'm not one of them. I take the advice of council planning officers, the advice of the Heritage Council, and clearly what appears to be support around the table today, and offer my vote of confidence in this plan.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Dakin.
Right, got me?
Yeah, I've got you.
I hit the exit button. Like our other councillors say, look, I want to thank the people that have represented and sent their emails in with their concerns. I also want to thank the council staff. It's been a long, drawn-out process, and I think you've done an amazing job to get to this point today. not wanting to repeat myself, but I agree with all the previous councillors and their comments. And I probably can't put it better than myself than as the Coordinator General, John Perry, did in his comments. The only thing I could add is today, let me represent the silent majority that that want this, that need this, that fully support this development. And look forward to it successfully being built and completed and operating. So I fully support it.
Thank you, Councillor Dakey. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to thank Richard, Leanne and the staff for doing a great job in all the recommendations. One question, do we need this motel in Launceston? Accommodation is booked out 3 or 4 times a year, 8 to 10 nights. We've got 1,400 rooms in Launceston for accommodation. There will be a new motel built in Devonport. I've got a few issues. My main issue is the height, 43 metres. People that live in the top of York Street and above are going to be looking at this. They're going to lose their view. I feel sorry for the residents, but the views are not considered. No doubt it will affect motels in Launceston. No doubt it will. Paul Davies' report recommended 24 metres. But this is 15 metres back off the streetscape, which is good. It's consistent and it applies with the council planning scheme. And there's not too many motels in Launceston that have got gyms and a nice swimming pool. The unemployment rate in Tasmania will be around 12 or 15%, around 30,000 jobs. It's a massive downturn in the construction industry, so I will be supporting this. And what I'll be supporting it for the tradies of Launceston in Tasmania, and I would also like the developer to make certain all Tasmanians are used on this job. And I will fully support it. But I'd like to see all Tasmanian tradies. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. When you're down this end of the table, everyone's already said everything you wanted to say to a fair degree. But I will just add a few notes. Like many of the other speakers, I've had lots of conversations with our community about this. And by and large, most people have enjoyed the style of the building where they have done the setback and see that is the, I guess, fitting in with Launceston's architecture. And to the many people who have written to us and felt that, one building is going to stop tourism coming to Launceston, I think you really need to take a big hard look at yourself. No one's going to stop coming to Launceston. We will still have wonderful examples. And in fact, what Launceston offers is in fact examples of all types of architecture since the 1820s, when we have the earliest colonial style architecture through Victorian, Federation, even Art Deco, and even that much maligned brutalist style Henty House, which is considered by many to be the ugliest building in town, but in architectural circles, it's now becoming quite celebrated. And so in time, this particular building, which in fact will have the style name of adaptive style, where they do integrate modern with older buildings, will in fact become part of what will attract people to Launceston to look at that and to look and see how a developer in maybe 50 years' time, they'll look back at the hotel and see how that was developed. So from my point of view, for all the reasons that others have said, yes, it's a big building. You cannot deny it. It is 11 stories and 40 metres high, but it is a high-rise building. It is not a skyscraper, as many people have called it, and we are not in danger of becoming the next Sydney or Manhattan or even Hobart. It's taken us 60 years to build a third building of around this size after the Telstra building, so I don't think we're about to suddenly become a Manhattan. Obviously, the financial benefits for the city of a 200-room hotel has been set out for others. It's something that the city has needed, particularly if they're going to get into the mid-size conference market. All our long-term strategic plans in Greater Launceston plan says we need this, so this meets that great need, the $60 million worth of activity, and it is in fact the part of what's needed as this area undergoes a transformation from the industrial precinct that it was to one of inner city living, which will see things like the art gallery being developed on the gasworks side along with the car park, and also the new UTAS buildings to be developed at Inveresk and Willow Street. So I'm quite happy to support this. If anyone fears for what it will look like, I do suggest they do what I did, go and stand in front of the Northern Club in Cameron Street, look across to the old AMP sandstone building, and then look up to the Telstra building behind it. That in fact is the view you will see, and if you think that looks terrible, then go and stand in front of the AMP building on the other side of the road and then look up and see what you see, and you see nothing but the sky. So it really is a matter of just looking that this needs to be taken in context, and the architects have done a great job, as have all of the council staff that have been involved, to take the architect and the owner of this site on a journey from what they've started off with to what they're now presenting to us. I'll be supporting this when it comes to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. I might start by just addressing some of the things that the councillors have said. Councillor Harris just mentioned when you get to this end of the table, not much needs to be said. Well, I will disagree with that, Councillor Harris. I think a lot needs to be said, and I'll start with, you know, the comparisons that you made with the Telstra building and the Myer building. Well, of course, a lot of people see those as gross mistakes in this town, buildings that don't suit the environment that they're in, and I do believe that this building will join those buildings as being another one of those, but we'll get to that. It's interesting that councillors talk about this being consistent with the scheme, and that we can't talk about the emotive reasons that people might have for objecting to this building, and yet not one councillor addresses 15.4.1 in our interim planning scheme of 2015, which clearly states that a building should be 12 metres or plus 1 metre compared to buildings around it. In this case, the Verge Hotel's about 24 metres. You might say then 25 metres for this building. And, you know, so this building, of course, relies on a huge amount of discretion. And I find it hard to believe that councillors can talk about it being consistent with the scheme and not even address that issue. We have Councillor Finlay, who talks about a 4-year process, and how Councillor Stochencek saying that the developers have listened to the people, and yet it's only now at the 11th hour that the people who are concerned about this development get to have any say whatsoever in this development. And we've heard from those representatives, and I congratulate people who go to the time and effort to make representation. Of course, the Heritage Council have given their blessing to this because, of course, the heritage has been protected. And that is the least you'd expect from any developer in Launceston, that they do respect our built heritage. And I do congratulate the developers on that front. They're certainly not removing heritage, and they're making a feature of that in their development. But a couple more council comments, if I might. Councillor Daking invokes the silent majority support this. Well, look, I think the silent majority may support development in general. I support developments in general. I have no problems with a hotel on this site. What I do have problems with is this hotel on this site. And I do believe that if it is built, there'll be a lot more people who do have similar problems with it. It's not a matter of, as Councillor Dawkins talks about, people being for change or against change at all. There are plenty of developments that go ahead in Launceston. There's plenty of change that occurs without this level of consternation in the community. So it's unfortunately, the proponents sort of nod to the existing heritage is a great thing, but that should be taken as a non-negotiable base for any developments in our town. And this is unfortunately where the praise must end, because this proposal will dwarf the current streetscape, including the yet to be completed Verge Hotel adjacent to it. The bulk and the height are completely out of character with its environs. I understand there's been some effort made to step this building back from the streetscape, but that doesn't reduce the impact of the sheer bulk and the sheer height of this building. It flies in the very face of the things that attract tourism to Launceston, and indeed much of what attracts people to Tasmania. Our reasonably intact heritage, built heritage, the livability of our city, the boutique experiences that people have, the sense of scale that is offered in food, in accommodation, events, and in the natural landscape and in the built landscape. So apart from anything else, this building is clearly outside the planning scheme, and this building seeks to take advantage of what we've protected by destroying it. It seems to be an anathema to me. It's interesting that Councillor Daking mentions the Coordinator General's office and his statement. I had no idea that the Coordinator General's office has been involved in this project for 4 years, in encouraging this process. I'm not sure, what influences that has had over the entire process, but I do take umbrage to the statement that John Perry makes that we might not get another chance. It's as if suggesting that nobody's ever going to build a hotel in Launceston again if we don't build this particular hotel. I can imagine a perfectly reasonable hotel on this site, still having the convention centre, still having the swimming pool, the spa, the sauna, whatever it might be, but not having the bulk and the height that this offers.
Excuse me, Councillor Walker, your time is up. Do you need an extension?
I would like that, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's someone happy to move that? Councillor Spencer, thank you. Seconded.
Second it, Mayor.
Councillor Mackenzie, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any against? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Walker. You may continue.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a subtext here that somehow it's too big to be refused, that we might not get another chance, that the amount of money invested is too great for us to say no. And yet, I do not think that people are objecting to it on those grounds. They're objecting to it on the grounds of primarily its impact on our established environment. And as usual, we're being told that the size is not negotiable, that somehow it has to be this big. It has to have this many rooms, otherwise it won't be successful. Yet other hotels are built, as again, the Verge Hotel just next door, nowhere near the size, nowhere near the height, and yet obviously there's a successful business model there for those operators. I'm sure there could have been an acceptable compromise somewhere along the track, but that opportunity has never been presented to the people of Launceston. That opportunity is what is needed with these types of developments, where we can have a community conversation about what is appropriate before we get to this point. And that's something that needs to happen with future developments. I think the representatives have said things much better than I could have myself. I will come back to the point that this building is too high for our present planning scheme, and what's worse, could well be used to justify an even taller building in Launceston in the near future. This just becomes a game of building one building above another, and that is not the intent of the planning scheme. So I will implore my fellow councillors to reflect upon the vision that they have for Launceston and to reject this massive overreach. There is no need for us to go to this extreme to accommodate a development of this sort. We can demand quality and we can demand appropriate designs. We can protect our brand. We can build on our brand. But not in this process, not when this is being developed without public consultation for a long period of time, and the community only in the last breath get an opportunity to object to the development that's presented to them. So I'll just conclude by saying that I appreciate all the efforts that the representatives have made. And
your time's up, Councillor Walker.
And implore councillors to reject this development application.
Thank you. Your time is up. Councillor McKenzie, do you wish to close?
May I close, Mayor?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Finlay. Oh, my apologies.
That's okay.
I'm happy to.
No, Councillor Finlay.
We could enter a team. I appreciate and acknowledge that all councillors have spoken on this item. It is such a significant development that it warrants such participation. I acknowledge the respectful manner within which each councillor along the table contributed to that and cited their personal assessment of this development application against the requirements of the scheme. I acknowledge the conditional approval of the Tasmanian Heritage Council and the work of our officers to work directly with and provide clear and considered feedback to the developer throughout the process, that we would have a development application that responds on and builds on the character and the foundations of our city. I want to positively speak to a number of the councillors that identified themselves at the end of the table and that they sometimes feel that their contribution is not able to be as significant. And I actually want to acknowledge some of those comments. Councillor Harris talked about the variety in the architectural styles within the catalogue of Launceston and how each of them differ. If you consider an Art Deco building to an industrial building to a Federation building, they're all different. And it is the nature of Launceston, the third oldest city in the country, that variety provides the heritage characteristics of our great city. And this development responds to that in the village of forms that are proposed for this site, the variety of materiality and the various patterns and textures that are on the site that in some way respond to elements within our community and within the architectural forms of Launceston. It is correct to say that this is not a game. It is correct to say that this is a formal legal process, that we sit as a planning authority and we need to respond to the requirements of the scheme. And I believe that the councillors today have done that. I take umbrage at personal attack to people's contributions and the erosion of reasonable contributions. And I feel that it is appropriate that when we speak to the items of discretion. I note that not all councillors did that today. This has been a long process. It has been a process that has had deep consideration, has evolved significantly through a variety of submissions, and I believe today, within reasonable consideration and response to the requirements of the scheme, presents a development application worthy of our support that will add to the materiality and the culture of our community for many years to come. I commend the motion.
Well, right on your time. Thank you very much, Councillor Finlay. I'll now put the motion. I'll ask individually so we can record each person's answer. Deputy Mayor?
Support.
Councillor Finlay?
Support.
Councillor Hugh McKenzie?
Support.
Councillor Rob Soward?
Support.
Councillor Jim Cox? Councillor Cox? Can you mute yourself?
Try it again. Technology's I need Councillor Harris's advice. Support, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Karina Stosenchek?
Support.
Councillor Andrea Dawkins?
Support.
Councillor Nick Daking?
Support.
Councillor Paul Spencer?
Support.
Councillor Alan Harris?
Support.
Councillor Tim Walker?
Against.
And for myself, I'm for. So that is unanimous, 11 to 1. Or not unanimous, that is majority, 11 to 1. That is passed. Now, do you want a 5-minute break, 10-minute break, or do you want to move on? Keep moving. Councillors, keep going?
Keep going.
Keep going. So we go to 9.2. We don't have any speakers for 9.2. Somebody happy to move 9.2, which is 357 to 361 Hobart Road. Is there a mover? Somebody who's not mooted? No?
This morning, a potential
Break of this.
decoupling of the motion was proposed.
Okay, who's somebody moving something then? Anything?
Leanne, was it?
Yes, yes, Mayor. I was Councillor Walker. I was suggesting that we amend the motion to decouple the rezoning of the land with the development application.
Have you got a copy of that, the wording for us, or?
I'm just having a look now. Sorry, Mayor.
I believe, Mayor, that for the purposes of us who have got access to the screen, it's just been put onto our screens. Councillor
Okay.
Walker.
Thank you. Yes, I see that now.
Perhaps you could read out what you're proposing, Councillor Walker.
Mayor, is it helpful if
That's not a decoupling, that's a refusal, isn't it?
So Mary, is it helpful? Would it be helpful to councillors if I explain what alternate wording council officers have prepared following the request from councillors this morning?
Yes, that'll be good. Thank you.
So the first three recommendations on what's on the screen are as per the recommendation of officers, which was regarding the application to amend the request to amend the scheme. So that's about initiating the planning scheme amendment. Item 4, this is where the decoupling that Councillor Walker was referring to comes in, and that is that with respect to the development application that was lodged with the request for the planning scheme amendment, that Councillor Walker, if he moves this motion, would be recommending that the development application be refused on the grounds that are outlined there.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that?
Yeah, I second Paul.
Councillor Spencer, second that. Councillor Walker, you wish to speak to your motion? Oh, so we're doing just the first pass, or is that all in one motion, or we?
It would be a motion
for you.
Sorry, again, does it help if I further explain? I'm sorry that so if this were moved and passed, then we would advertise still as per any planning scheme amendment that is initiated by the council, and we would also advertise that the application, the development application, was refused.
Yep, that's correct. That's my understanding of the motion that's before us. So, Councillor Walker, you wish to speak to it?
If that's moved and seconded, may you take questions before speaking?
I can take questions. Yes, I can. Councillor Finlay, you got a question?
General Manager Hurst, and then when it is put on display for advertising, it returns to the table. At that point, consideration of the responses can be used to consider the development application portion and obviously we can't make a decision, but we can take a recommendation forward to the Commission considering those responses.
Yes, that's correct. I don't know if Duncan wants to provide further explanation at this point.
No?
If he's there.
If he's there. Doesn't look like it.
Nope.
Any other questions, Councillor Finlay?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise, Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I do. Yes, and having looked at the documents for this application, there does not seem to be any difficulty with the concept of rezoning this land. This is an area that has some commercial, some residential land, and it's not inappropriate that this land may be used for general residential again. But it is the coupling of that with the development application to construct 24 multiple dwellings within a subdivision that is something that caused concern for me, and it has to do with the density of the development and the points that have been listed, and I thank General Manager Hurst for those, that there's a sense that there may be a shortage of space, but not limited to outdoor relaxation, private open space, storage, and that we may end up in a situation, depending on the future use and sale of these properties, where we have, what would appear to be less than desirable housing, albeit very affordable, and being something that could be seen as a definite positive in a time where housing is becoming more and more of an issue, and the council should spend some more time to assess the implications of such a dense development in this particular area. So that's enough for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Spencer, wish to
Mayor,
comment?
it's the Deputy. I've got a question.
Oh, Deputy Mayor, yes.
Thank you. Look, it's just important for me to understand administratively, notwithstanding those comments from Councillor Walker, I don't actually agree with some of them, and it differs to what I understood that the rationale was with the separation. So I guess my question to the General Manager, Leanne Hurst, is with regard to item 4, my understanding was that we were seeking, and this indeed may not be the mechanism to achieve what we need to, but we were seeking to separate the amendment process to the approval of the DA. And so I guess in regard to the motion that Councillor Walker is moving, we are drawn into his thoughts and the thoughts of the table with regard to the DA specifically, and the details contained within, which was not necessarily my intent and is not necessarily reflective of where my thoughts are going. So is the mechanism that is currently being considered by the councillors the only mechanism to separate the two tasks before us?
General Manager Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. Richard and or Duncan will probably jump in here, but the application has been lodged as the process to amend, and the DA has been submitted as part of it. So the council's required to consider what's been submitted, but Richard can probably has way more experience with these dual amendment and DA processes, so may be able to answer that more thoroughly.
Thank you.
I'm not entirely sure what the difference in expectations were, but in terms of council's ability to decide these separately and refuse the development application and support the rezoning, the Act specifically provides for that. As with other amendment proposals, these will proceed to advertising and we'll receive comments on those and then consider the comments and then forward those to the Commission, and ultimately they'll be decided. So council's view on the amendment would be, so if at a future hearing we would argue that the development is inappropriate for the grounds outlined, but we would support the amendment side of it. Is that clear?
It's clear. Thank you. It is clear, but I guess what we're being asked to do now is to be drawn into the merits of the whole proposal, whereas my understanding was that we were looking to separate them to allow members of the community and others to delve deeper into part 4, which was the actual consideration of the 24 multiple dwellings. So I guess to summarise my question again, is this is refusing the application today the only way to separate it, given that it was a dual application?
Yes, if the choice today is either to approve both elements or approve the rezoning and refuse the development.
Thank you.
That's the choice today.
Yep, that's what the motion's doing for us. Thank you. So, Councillor Spencer,
could I just add just a further clarification? Would there not be an opportunity for if the developer was aware for them to withdraw the development application and we just continue with that? Would that not be another option?
Well, I believe we've spoken to the development, to the proponent, and they've been made aware of that. And at this point, there's no word that they want to withdraw.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Spencer, do you wish to speak?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I'd just like to just wonder if we just can have a vote on the rezoning today. I think that's what we should do, and just leave the application for later on. I think that's what everyone wants. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak?
May I ask a question, Mayor?
CEO wanted to say something, did he?
I would just clarify, Mayor, I will, that, I mean, it's a 43A application. The process that was explained by Richard is the options that are on consideration for the council today. It's not an option to defer the decision in respect to the land use planning component or the development application part. So yeah, it's not something that we can do.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay, did you?
Oh, my question was deemed approvals not until dates following the next council meeting. It may not have been in this interim scheme, but I do remember previously when an item like this was decoupled, we considered the rezoning and then we separately considered the DA. And it would seem to me that there's time to do that, which is what I was expecting to come forward this afternoon. And I'm wondering if that is in fact possible within the provisions of the scheme.
That's a question for Richard. Obviously, this motion doesn't do that.
We could seek to defer the entire consideration. I think if we wanted to decouple them and approve one today, I'm not sure what the benefit of that would be, but we would have to seek some advice about the process around that. I'm not entirely clear, and I wouldn't want to give advice on the fly on that. There's definitely the ability to consider them independently of each other. They're not linked decisions in the sense that if you approve the rezoning, you're not bound to approve the development proposal. But to the extent that those can be at separate meetings, I'd have to take some advice on.
On face value, Richard, I wouldn't think you can. It's a 43A application. It's a combined amendment and permit. So, I mean, I think you either make a decision to defer the entire matter.
Yeah, the whole matter.
Or you'll progress with the options as Richard outlined earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers or questions?
We have to seek an extension.
I'm happy to speak, Mayor.
Councillor Mackenzie, yes.
Yeah, look. I guess that certainly the consternation this morning was that I think most people saw merit in the land use change from its current zoning to general residential. And therefore happy to do that. I guess a number of us had questions in regards to the development application in itself. So this actually does separate the two, but we make the decision all in one. And I note what Councillor Finlay was trying to do and say, let's make a decision on the zoning and go off there and then deal with the other separately. The problem that we've got ourselves into now is we actually have to make a decision as to whether we're going to approve the DA or not. And I think even in separate decisions, we would have had to make that decision as well. So the reality of if it is that we go ahead on this particular motion, then we're going to be sending the land use planning approval change to a new zone. We're going to be saying yes to that. We're going to be saying no to the DA. Certainly, I had some concerns with some of the elements of the DA that I wanted to explore separately. And I wasn't overly comfortable with making a yes decision. There were a number of comments like not needing sheds and so forth like that because the Catholic Care was going to look after the gardens, and that's only relevant while they continue to own and operate the property. So if we make that decision and the property sold and Catholic Care aren't there to continue to maintain those gardens, how do they then get maintained? So that was one of the major concerns I had with it. Obviously, a very tight block that they've tried to bang as many units as they can in. I understand the commentary around affordable housing, but it needs to be still appropriate housing for all concerned. It talked about potentially not having a lot of families in there just because of the nature of the housing. That may or may not be the case. We're not sure or privy to those sorts of concepts. So there were just a number of things, and without footpaths, albeit controlled by lower speed limits within the precinct, certainly still left me with some concerns about the development application, and therefore probably might have voted against the whole lot. But I'm very happy for the land plan use, the change from one zone to the next. So I'm comfortable with this as it stands.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Can I ask a question first, please? May I ask a question first?
Yes.
Richard, in the event that this gets recommended through and the application is refused, then the applicant could resubmit a development application, and if they attended to the concerns in terms of storage and space, that would be significant enough a change to this development application to be able to receive in not an extended period of time. There's something about it not being able to resubmit within a period of time. Sorry, my question's not very clear.
So in my view, the applicant would have a number of things. They could make a submission to the advertising process and argue their case. So they could argue, and that might involve some kind of modification to the plans. So that might happen through that process. Council might accept or agree with parts of the recommendation that the plans should be modified. That could go to the tribunal. If ultimately they weren't prepared to do that, and the commission determined that this wasn't appropriate, then there would be an opportunity to modify the plans and come back for a development application, a different development application once the new zone is in place, if the zone got approved. So there's a number of avenues open. They can argue through this current process, or if they weren't successful, they could come back for a subsequent process.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak or another question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. And I appreciate the explanation of that and explanations of the responses to earlier questions. Thank you. I'm comfortable with the rezoning element of this. I'm comfortable with the intentions of the development application, but as been highlighted by Councillor Mackenzie, there are a number of elements that seem to limit the livability and amenity of people that either may use it under the proponent's proposed use, but always we have to remember that we're dealing with the property and not the proponent as such, and that in the future that might have an eroded quality of living for future owners of the site. So I support the refusal element of this. However, I strongly encourage the proponent to receive the feedback with positive intent, to participate in the process, and for the community that are familiar with this type of living and supportive of low-cost affordable housing to also participate in this process and provide feedback, so that what we recommend going forward is something that can reasonably be provided for the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Any other speakers for or against? I take it that's no. Councillor Walker, you wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know if there's much more to add, really. Certainly reiterate Councillor Finlay's comments at the end there that would certainly encourage the proponent to see this as a positive step, although it might not be apparent at the moment. In wanting to see this development take place, that the council's fully supportive of the residential zoning. and look forward to that interaction with our planning department to come forward with acceptable solutions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put it to the vote. So, Deputy Mayor?
Support.
Councillor Finlay?
Support.
Councillor Mackenzie?
Support.
Councillor Soward?
Support.
Councillor Cox?
Support.
Councillor Stosnjek?
Support.
Councillor Dawkins?
Support.
Councillor Dakin?
Support.
Councillor Spencer?
Support.
Councillor Harris?
Support.
And Councillor Walker supports.
Indeed. Thank you.
And I'm supporting. So that's unanimous, all councillors. So that is carried, the amended motion. So we now move on to 9.3. We do have a statement to be read for 9.3.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll read that one.
Good, thank you.
This is a statement from Hannah Bradley of Launceston. My name is Hannah Bradley and I am the General Manager of Aramex Tasmania. I am a Launceston local and I'm a mother of a very animated 5-year-old girl. My phone is always on, my door is always open, and I look forward to introducing myself to the local residents over a cuppa. Aramex is not a faceless international company, but we are a community and family orientated business. I understand the concern about excess cars and noise in the street. I too would have concerns if this was to be proposed on my street. Therefore, I endeavour to do everything that I can to control this. I could think of nothing worse than disrupting our fellow neighbours. My staff and customers have ample parking within the grounds of the proposed depot. Therefore, none of my staff will ever be blocking the street. We have all had a sorry we missed you calling card left in our letterboxes, so you can imagine how quickly the turnaround is for us when passing on a parcel to a customer. I'm always a strong believer in keeping the streetscape looking pristine and community spirit. It looks better for my neighbours, customers and for me because I will be spending an ample time at the site. I have begun to plant rosemary and lavender pots to bring to the site should we be granted the lease. Please feel free to break some rosemary off for your Sunday roasts as you walk by. I also welcome any roast recipes you may want to share. Should you at any time have any issues, please do not hesitate to contact me. I am here for you. I want to be the best commercial neighbour and friend to you as possible.
Thank you for that. Yep. Is somebody to move the motion?
Happy to move, Mayor.
As it is, Councillor Mackenzie?
Yes.
Is there a seconder?
Happy to second that. Deputy.
That was Deputy Mayor, I think, first, wasn't it?
Happy.
Was that Deputy, I think?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So, Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to speak to it?
Look, I just think that the letter from the tenant, I think, or the applicant says it all to me, and certainly in the way that they've designed how they operate the site and the conditions that we put in relation to it certainly will minimise the impact on that street and the residents thereof by their major truck coming in from Robertson Street. Certainly will, and coming in and unpacking inside the warehouse. I think their forklift truck is going to have noiseless reversing lights on it. So they're doing everything they can to minimise the impact on the neighbourhood, and I guess in relation to parking and so forth, as they've said, they've got adequate parking on site for their staff and I guess anybody that visits the site. So I perceive there's minimum impact, and if I was a neighbour of them, I would say they're doing everything they can to utilise a commercial property which is zoned commercial for use in a way which is sympathetic to people that live in the residences nearby.
Thanks very much. Councillor Mackenzie, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, if you were one of the residents of the 17 dwellings in Windsor Street, you would wonder what on earth had gone wrong in your street to provoke 2 DAs in the same month. I really want to thank those people who have so passionately taken to communicate what it's like for them living in a short no-through road where parking is a significant issue. We're living with your neighbours who are zoned commercial, is a significant issue where, for the majority, you've lived there a long time, you want to get along with your neighbours, you want to live in harmony, but you want your right to unspoilt bliss in the place that you call home to be uninterrupted. I think the letter, as Councillor Mackenzie has said, from the proponent is a good way of demonstrating how you can effect great outcomes in working together. But it's interesting that some of the issues that, whilst they're not directly related to this particular DA, they are directly related to what it's like in Windsor Street when you live there. And I'm really, as I know Councillor Dawkins will be, we are really appreciative of the way that last week traffic parking markings were put into the road for the residents of Windsor Street, because that will alleviate some of their concerns, and we would encourage our enforcement division to continue with their random patrols to ensure that parking of those workers from the commercial undertakings does not impact the residents who have enough to deal with. So certainly want to applaud the way that this particular developer is proposing to work with their neighbours. This is to be commended, and encourage our enforcement staff to do their bit to ensure that the people of Windsor Street can continue the life that they would like to live in their homes.
Thank you, Deputy. Is any other speakers?
Yes, please.
Councillor Finlay,
Councillor
was
Dawkins.
it? Councillor Dawkins, sorry.
Thank you.
You may speak.
Yes, with the Deputy Mayor, I visited Windsor Street last week. And what we really, I guess, we heard was a quantum of issues about living the street, as the Deputy Mayor touched on, quite unrelated in a way to this particular DA today, because I believe the people we spoke to were already reasonably comfortable with this development, with this change of use. The quantum of activities which cause concern are that inadequate parking, the traffic issues, and the footpaths which are too narrow and often parked over. And of course, I would like to thank the responsive council officers who came within hours of me requesting just to check in on the street and see how it's going, because it appeared that there were a number of issues which were making what should be a beautiful place to live quite confronting for people, and especially during this time.
What consultation is currently taking place or is intended to take place?
So we've had a round of meeting with the various groups, and obviously we are meeting with TMAG officials as well, or staff as well, and we'll be reframing how we need to engage moving forward. So at this point in time, there's no formal engagement occurring.
Thank you, CEO. I have another series of questions, probably for the CEO. As a part of our rates relief package, did we as a council agree to exclude commercial properties that were not currently occupied from our rates relief?
The vacant buildings, you mean?
Yep.
Yes.
That's right.
Yep. And how did we determine whether a commercial property was deemed vacant?
Look, I'd need to take that on notice, Councillor, and check that with our finance area. I didn't specifically myself get individually involved in that, but I can find out.
Thank you, CEO. I will notify the council that my property that has not had, I have not had a business in it since 2013. Yet I've been offered, in fact, given the rate relief for my commercial property. And I'm concerned that if that's happened in my instance, which I fully intend to return to the council, that it may have happened with other properties across Launceston.
Yeah, the CEO will follow that up. Thank you. Any other questions?
That's all, Mayor.
Thank you. That's all the answer to, that's all the questions. We then move on to 14.1 council workshops. The workshops held since the last meeting. Somebody happy to move?
So moved, Mayor, Deputy.
Mayor, thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Spencer, thank you. Anyone wish to speak to it at all? Deputy?
No, other than briefly, I guess, to say we're appreciative of the work, the adaptive work that TNT are providing with regard to the tourism sector. Further to Councillor Dawkins at last council meeting, providing an update with regard to Junction that was formally presented. Process with regard to the 3-year review of the city deal was outlined to councillors, with opportunity in the coming week to be involved in that, and most importantly the opportunity to undertake a look at the work that our council and other service providers are undertaking in the homelessness space, together with, of course, the state government, was appreciated.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Spencer, you wish to comment at all?
Yeah.
No. Any other councillor wish to speak to the item? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
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 Any against?
Aye.
Any against? So that's carried by all. We move on to 18.1, closure of part of Charles Drive, Norwood.
Happy to move, Mayor.
Moved Councillor Mackenzie.
I'll second that.
Second,
Councillor Harris.
Councillor Harris seconded. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak to it?
Just the completion of the process that we've been going through.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
That just about says it all. This is the third time it's been back before us, but hopefully now will be the last.
Yeah. Any other councillor wishes to speak to it? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
No, Mayor.
I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any against, say no. So that is carried by all unanimously. And we close the meeting. Thank you all for your time again. Really appreciate it. The way you conducted the meeting has been fantastic. So well done to all councillors and to the staff. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mayor.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.